Welcome to this webinar. It's part of the series for Emergent Bilingual and Texas newcomers. We're very excited today to talk about a topic that is pretty consistent across districts in Texas. My name is Laura Axtell. I'm an educational consultant for Reading Horizons, and this is part one of welcoming students and creating those educational environments. And I'd like to introduce our co-host, which is Stephany Gonzales.
Hi, thank you, Laura. Yes, my name is Stephany Gonzales, and I am a multilingual educator here in the state of Texas. I'm currently serving in Channelview ISD. Oh my goodness. Wow. I am currently serving in Channelview ISD as an ESL coach, but I have had experience in one of the largest districts in Texas as a multilingual specialist as well. And it is an honor to be here today. Thank you.
Great. So we asked you to do a couple of things prior to the webinar. One was to complete a survey, and several of you did that. So we're going to talk about that data. The second thing was to submit questions, and a number of you did that as well. And looking at the questions, which were really great and covered a span of topics, we want to mention that we are going to do a second webinar in January on the 22nd, and that will focus specifically on and a deep dive into the academic instruction of emergent bilinguals. So many of your questions were about those kinds of things. How do you recognize dyslexia possibly, or learning differences in multilingual learners, etc. So we'll cover all of those kinds of topics in our webinar in January. The rest, though, we will cover today, and that's going to be the opportunity for all of us to share, because we know a lot of you have a lot of experience in this space. So please use the chat, share your experiences. When we get to resources, feel free to put resources in the chat, those kinds of things, so that we can really have a great discussion about this topic. So we're going to start with the survey, just looking at some data from what people put in terms of what they're seeing. So the question was, what's the trend for enrollment with bilinguals? And so 16% of you said enrollment has stayed the same. 16% said there's been an increase in the number and types of languages. So maybe before you were seeing mostly Spanish speakers, now you're seeing lots of other languages and different languages that maybe you haven't seen before. But the largest number said the number of just emergent bilinguals across the board has increased. This is not going to add up to 100 because you could check more than one. So some of you are seeing not only a larger enrollment, but also the number of languages. Are you seeing greater numbers of students who have not had formal education? The 75% said yes. The greater number of newcomers who don't speak English at all, again, 75% yes. And do you really have an established and successful protocol at your school? And it was 50-50. So those of you who feel like you have a really successful protocol, we would love to hear what you're doing. Those of you who don't, we hope you'll gain some ideas from today. And we wanted to start by talking about what is the orientation process before we ever get into academics. How do we create a safe space where students can actually be able to learn? And so just looking at the length of time for orientation, 45, almost half said 1 day or portion of 1 day was the orientation for an emergent bilingual. More than 1 week, 25%, 2 to 3 days, 25%. So that ranges across the board as well. And then how do you feel about services and supports to meet your bilingual population? 50% said yes, they feel like they have adequate services and supports, and 50% said no. So we asked, if you said no, what's missing? And these are some of the comments that people had. So there's a kind of a consistent theme: professional development and having effective programs and resources, making sure that you have the right staff support, etc. So we're going to start with talking about enrollment. And enrollment is a really important topic. And so Stephany's going to talk a lot about what happens often in Texas and in districts in Texas. I have the benefit of working across the country, so I was able to contact emergent bilingual programs in 6 different states. So some of the images you see, some of the resources you see came from elsewhere, which is great to be able to share. So Stephany, can you start by talking about school enrollment?
Yes, absolutely. So here at my school, the parents actually come up here with the student present, and on any day, they can come up here to the front office and say, we want to register or enroll our student here. Normally, the parent will have to go to each individual school and enroll their student at that specific school. So I have a high school aged child. I'm going to take them to the high school. I have an elementary school child. I need to figure out what elementary school is closest that I'm zoned to, and I have to then report my child to that school and then do the same process. So we do the process at every single school. And our district has a great staff that is ready to register. We do have a registrar, right? But we also have an ESL facilitator here, which is also looked at as an ESL coordinator in other districts. And she does a great job at providing a bilingual service and registers our students, our newcomers, and our refugees that are coming from Spanish-speaking countries, and she's able to register them in Spanish as well. From there, our counselors, the partners of our huge ESL team here on campus, create their schedule based on the specific needs and based on the transcript that the student is traveling with. So if we have a student who is coming to our campus and trying to enroll, but they do not speak English or Spanish, likely what's going to happen is that they will bring their case manager or a caseworker, a family friend, or somebody who they know that speaks English so that they can serve as a translator. One of the things that we really want to work on is creating a relationship with the district to be able to say, hey, district, we have a parent here who does not speak English or Spanish that we're having trouble communicating with. They did not bring a caseworker. They did not bring a family friend, and we would require your service. However, that can kind of pause the registration and say, okay, we can schedule somebody for another day, which is something that we've seen happen at my other district. So at the larger district, we were able to say, okay, as the multilingual department, we're going to send one of our Arabic speaking tutors to that campus at this time so that we can then register that family. But here at a smaller district, we are limited to just English and Spanish. So we do have to get creative sometimes, or our families have to come already ready with a caseworker or a family friend that does speak English.
Thanks. So one of the things that I was able to find out from many districts and other places is that they do it a little differently. They actually have their students register at the district or a central enrollment location in the area if it's a really large district. And the way that works for them is that they have specific staff and resources already in place. So the protocol is very, very clear. They have all the resources for translation and translation services. They take care of assigning the schools and giving the parents information about that. They take care of transportation. They take care of even assessments. Some of them do the assessments there. And then the district has all the information in their record. They communicate with the school. So the school knows, hey, you've got a new student that speaks this language coming in, tomorrow or next week, or you've got 3 students coming in and they speak a language that we haven't seen before. When I talked to them a little bit about the model at each school, they said, we can't imagine doing that, though we think that would be very hard for a school to be able to handle and just have those resources. So those 2 models exist, and it's just something to consider because that could be really helpful to be able to have a couple of different ideas of models. So we're going to talk a little bit about processes for enrollment. So in some places, there are newcomer programs within the schools. We're going to talk about that, but also some program or some districts offer a centralized newcomer academy. And that means that students, when they're registered without English, they often can have that, very specific kinds of enrollment and orientation. We'll talk about that in a minute. The questions to ask are, what are the roles of, your coordinators and counselors? And Stephany will talk about that a little later. For secondary students, how is scheduling handled? Because that may make a big difference when we're talking about, credits and things like that. And then what services and supports are available for students and their families? And Stephany mentioned that in the past, she's worked with a lot of those, and sometimes they will bring someone with them. Other districts that I talked to said that doesn't always happen. So on the right, what you're seeing is a pamphlet translated into Pashto that is given to families as part of their packet, translated into whatever language they speak. And this is a list of all the resources in the community. So it's tying them into, agencies and services if needed. But also then often districts know about, what kinds of funding might be available if students come from a very warm country and don't have winter coats. And in Texas, it's been cold in a couple of winters lately. So, and then what resources are available for communication and translation? So obviously, as Stephany mentioned, you can have a translator. And would you say that, how often would you say that happens in your district? That somebody brings a translator with them?
So at the larger district, I was working with 7 elementary schools who had high populations of refugee students, excuse me. So they brought their case manager, or the case manager kind of located the zone school. The case manager was then telling the parents and would accompany the parents. So it was very often that they brought somebody because they knew that they would not be able to receive that help. When it comes to a Spanish speaking parent, they're more likely to have somebody on campus who they can have translate for them. So that's not as common. But again, if you didn't bring a translator, what do you do? What do we do as a school? How do we support? How do we communicate? Because we do have to enroll the student. So what do we do?
Right, exactly. So I just need to make sure. I just need to share my sound. Sorry, I didn't do that earlier because I want to show you a video. So there are lots of great resources out there now. And I want to show you one because especially if you're at a district where you're getting a lot of languages that you've never heard before, that can be really helpful. So there is a device called Translate Live, and I'm just going to play a quick video of that so you can see how that would work.
Hola, mi hijo está enfermo hoy.
Hello, my son is sick today.
Okay, what's going on with him today?
Bueno, ¿qué está pasando con ellos hoy?
Tiene fiebre y tos.
Has a fever and cough.
Okay, I'll get him all excused for today, but if his fever persists, he needs to be fever-free for 24 hours with no Motrin or Tylenol.
Está bien, los excusaré a todos por hoy, pero si su fiebre persiste, debe estar sin fiebre durante 24 horas sin Motrin ni Tylenol.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
De nada. Ten un buen día.
This is our new language interpreter, and this is going to be great for families that come in, for both our students and for their parents that do not speak English, and we can translate automatically for them. We do have other options, but this one is something that's available immediately and is great for in-person as well as on the phone. It helps us to give the best service that we can to those families.
So one of the things that's Translate Live. One of the nice things about that is there's a feature where you can preload enrollment kinds of questions. So it will automatically get that information from the parents in their language. So that could be really helpful. As I mentioned, there's a lot of resources. So I don't know if anyone's also seen something like Time Kettle. One of the districts I talked to uses that, where it's an in-ear device and it will translate simultaneously to multiple languages, kind of like the UN. So there are more and more resources out there to support, translation and communication. So welcoming new families. First impressions are really important. So my question is always, what do your families that are new to America, new to Texas, new to your district, going to see when they come into your school? That really helps them know this is a safe and welcoming environment. First impressions are very important. And it's one of the key things we want to think about in terms of orientation and, really allowing our students to feel comfortable in the space is what they see. So just things throughout the school. And again, this is just pulled from a lot of different schools, and can be really, really helpful just as an initial way for our families to feel more comfortable as they're going through the process. We're going to talk a little bit about assessment, because that is critically important. And Stephany will talk a lot more about that, and how that works in Texas. But how are students assessed and when and who does that? So in some cases, as I mentioned, the district office actually takes care of that. In other cases, that'll happen at the school. How is that data used for decision making? And is the current process that you're using effective? So just basic kinds of information that's needed is, what is the student's language coming in? Their L1, do they read and write in that language? Do they have a level of oral proficiency? And how well or do they read at all, read and write at all in English? Those are really key kind of components. So I want Stephany, can you take this away? We want to talk a little bit about what your district does and what you've seen happening elsewhere in Texas.
Yes, so at the time of enrollment, we do the home language survey where we find out what language is spoken at home. And when it's an emergent bilingual, we know that L1 is not English. So from there, we have to determine the proficiency level of the student, whether the student has, and we also pull their transcripts. So we're seeing whether they have had formal schooling leading up to them moving here to the United States, or if it's interrupted or limited. So we're getting a lot of information as a student has enrolled. And one of the things that we don't know is how well they speak English or whether they speak English at all until we do the Summit K-12 diagnostic assessment or that diagnostic screener. Summit K-12 is a program that we have district-wide here. And with that, it tests all 4 language domains. It tests reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and gives you their proficiency levels in all 4 domains. And that's a really great tool that we have leveraged in order to address the specific needs of students, because sometimes our students are coming to us and although they're emergent bilinguals or although they're newcomers, they're actually proficient in English and they're writing really well and they're speaking really well. And we don't want to label them. Well, we do label them as EB, but we don't want that label of EB to determine whether they're receiving high quality, high rigor instruction or limiting them to learning foundational language skills when it's not necessarily something that they need. But on the other end, we are going to receive newcomers that are either not proficient or sometimes not even literate. And with that, this test is going to give us that information. And that test also creates a personalized learning path for them that gives them lessons in all 4 language domains that allows them to practice at their level. So it's differentiated instruction and it's completely computer-based, which has been really great for the kids. In addition to that, the teachers can also pull that data and say, okay, well, overall, my students' listening is on track. I love where they're at, and they're showing me through their PLP scores that they're doing great. They understand what's being told to them. However, their speaking hasn't grown. So I can pull an item type from the speaking component in Summit K-12 and assign it to everybody. I want everybody to look at this image and speak for 45 seconds using academic vocabulary or some high frequency words that we have been working on, and really describe 45 seconds. Everybody's talking. We're all recording ourselves and we're going to use our English. And I want to see what you guys say about the image that I'm displaying. So it has those item types in there that the teacher can then pull. And then another thing that I love is that the teacher can also model using those same lessons. So for our short constructed responses, our extended constructed responses, we're going to pull up an item type and I'm going to model, I'm going to create a graphic organizer and I'm going to have students watch me write and then mimic my writing or start the writing process using those item types as well. So Summit K-12 has been a really great platform for us to use that really focuses on building language proficiency in all 4 domains, rather than just doing that call and response that we know that ESL classes have done in the past.
And then could you talk a little bit about how that connects to TELPAS?
Yes, absolutely. So TELPAS is that state exam, right? TELPAS is that state test that measures English language proficiency, not necessarily at the end of the year, but in February, March, April. So our students are taking this test and it's almost exactly like Summit K-12, and Summit K-12 is meant to mimic and mirror TELPAS. It's a computer-based test. It tests all 4 language domains and it gives you the proficiency levels as well. And so what we do is we take the data and from the Summit K-12 diagnostic assessment at the beginning of the year, we go through the personalized learning path, or we take specific target lessons so that when our students take the TELPAS, they are familiar with not necessarily the platform that they take the assessment on, but they're familiar with the item types and have had authentic practice doing a listening strategy or speaking, reading, and writing components of the TELPAS. They're familiar with it. They've been successful with it. They've been supported through it. And now when they take the state assessment, we know that we worked towards building English language proficiency. And that TELPAS exam is then the formal, like the actual, the true proficiency of the student for that year.
Awesome. So if some of you are using something else that you've also found to be really useful, then please feel free to put that in the chat because we'd love to know what those things are too. All right, so moving ahead, another thing to consider as we're enrolling and orienting students, has the student previously been involved, participated in formal education? So we are getting more and more students, SIFE students or SLIFE students, who have not been enrolled in formal education. So for example, Mexico has a well-established educational system. Most students have been in school, but Guatemala does not. So some students may not have been in school before, and are there special orientation needs that may need to be provided for them? So we want to talk about orientation. And, you know, again, I'm going to let Stephany take care of this because there's a lot of things that come up, and really orientation has to start with parents.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about is not that we receive a student and we say, okay, you're here to learn. The student is not just new to our school. The student is new to the country. They're new to the community. And the student isn't the only person that's new. The parents are new as well. So I love starting with the parent orientation because the parents are really going to be the ones that bring the kids to school, that prepare the kids for school. So, and they need the most information so that they don't trust us with their kids and don't have any information of their own. So in the past, I have held parent orientations where we discuss simple things like attendance policies, because attendance is something here that funds our schools. And it holds a lot of weight. So we talked about how attendance was mandatory, and failure to attend can lead to receiving letters from court. It can lead to truancy. It has some sort of consequence. And I think that it's important to say that. It's important for them to know ahead of time before they get into trouble and they just start receiving letters in the mail. The other thing was telling them about our student code of conduct, The Student Code of Conduct is a book that only comes in English and Spanish. And if we have people from other countries, we have to either provide a translated version or at least give them a brief description of what is in the Code of Conduct. One of the things that I found was with Afghani refugees, it was completely normal for them to start fighting in the middle of class or start fighting in the middle of recess, because fighting was a normal thing for them to do back in their former country. So when they got here, we were like, no, 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 no. Actually, fighting is a very serious thing. We cannot promote violence and we have to use your words, right? So it was one of those things to where we had a code of conduct and we had to make sure that students understood what a misbehavior was, in order for them not to be receiving consequences, because it's really important for us that your student is successful, not just academically, but behaviorally as well in our campus. And then we also talked about the dress code policies, which we didn't say the girls can't wear the short skirts or that, you know, the boys can't show tattoos. That's not what the dress code was. It was actually inclusive. We were able to say things like, your hijab is welcome here. You can wear the hijab. Because at the time, it was a very, very scary time and place for Muslim women in France when we were holding these parent orientations. So we had to make them aware that if your child wears a hijab to school, she will be respected. No one will touch her hijab and she will be fine. And also making sure that if they are not able to wear specific clothing like shorts, because in PE we ask the students to wear shorts, that they have a conversation with us and let us know what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, so that we know what to tell our teachers when the student is coming in. And then lastly, we also had to talk about the dietary restrictions. We don't necessarily think about it, but Muslim people have a very specific diet that they have to abide by. And we, as a nutrition services or as a campus, our nutrition services couldn't do anything about it unless we had a doctor's note. And that was a learning curve for a lot of people, because normally we just say, oh, well, do you have any vegetarian options or whatever? But in order to ensure that the cafeteria did not provide pork to a student or did not provide meat to a student, a doctor's note actually had to be written, given to the nurse, and then the nurse had to turn around and give it to nutrition services in order to ensure, right? We could recommend, or the cafeteria worker could say like, oh no, baby, don't choose that today. But in order to ensure that the child would not be eating something outside of their diet, we did have to have a doctor's note. So we had to state that in the parent orientation as well.
And just continuing on with parent orientation, I'm going to just jump to school logistics, and then I'll go back and have Stephany talk about a couple of these other things. But one of the things that's really important in parent orientation is that they understand the logistics of schools. They can be very different in the US than they are everywhere else around the world. So this is an example from that same district in Kansas, which sees a lot of different languages because they have a lot of meatpacking companies. So they see workers coming from all over the world speaking languages. This is an example of their school calendar translated into Pashto and explaining things like holidays and, you know, professional development days when your kids won't come to school, but also things like, you know, summer breaks and holiday breaks, when are meals offered, and where will students go from, if you're in an elementary school now, where will they go to middle school or high school? And just kind of understanding all those components. And then Stephany, can you speak to kind of the rest of that and how you see that play out as well?
Yes, so we definitely wanted to let them know, like, okay, your student goes to this school right now, but in middle school, they will be going to another one. And if your child is in the 5th grade, they're moving schools next year. So just getting them comfortable and getting them all of the information that we often take for granted. One of the things that I thought was great was in my former district, when we had a large population of Muslim students, we started recognizing Eid as a holiday, a district holiday, because we wanted to ensure that everybody felt honored, celebrated, and we didn't have to have a million absences because our students were missing for religious purposes. But in those parent orientations as well, we wanted to bring the parents and the family comfort by saying that we were going to provide them with, each student was going to have some time with a mentor or with a tutor that spoke in their L1. So we have somebody who speaks Pashto that comes into your child's reading class or their math class, and that teacher is there once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, and is providing one-on-one support or small group instruction. And oftentimes those mentors were providing academic support, but they also served a purpose with SEL as well. So with that social emotional learning came them sharing the behavior expectations or them having those conversations about how is school going for you. And I hear that you're having a great time in class and I see that you're using new words, or let's read the story together and talk about it. And it was really beautiful to connect those campuses with tutors or with mentors that spoke in that L1 because the student felt comfortable. And the teachers and, or I'm sorry, the parents also had a level of comfort because they felt like they would have community at school as well. Another topic that we covered in the parent orientation was whether transportation was provided or not. At the current district that I'm at in Channelview, everybody can take the bus to school. Not one student has to walk or drive to school. The parents have the option. There's a bus stop almost at every corner, and the bus runs beautifully. Our transportation services here are incredible. They're very reliable, and everybody has access to transportation here. In my former district, that wasn't the case because it's one of the largest districts in Texas. So in that sense, we did have to have a difficult conversation about at the parent orientation saying, you will have to figure out transportation. And it's a conversation that comes up a lot. If your child wants to stay after school for a extracurricular activity, you will have to find transportation. If they need to stay for tutoring, you will have to find transportation. And oftentimes they were shocked because in their former countries, there was a bus that rode through the city, and maybe there was just one bus stop, but there was transportation or there was walking happening. So transportation is a big topic that, although sometimes we do not provide, we do have to be clear and communicate that as well.
One of the things, Stephany, could you talk about, because along with school logistics also comes the whole issue of grades and grading periods, marking periods and things like that. How do you communicate that with parents to help them understand that though, you know, what students are doing will equate to something? And how do you handle that with your students who are non-English speakers at that early, you know, emergent, as well as they become more proficient in English? How is grading handled, and what do you say to parents about that?
So grading is a really interesting topic because if you have low English proficiency, your academic performance at the beginning times it's going to be a little bit different. But luckily, rather than just throwing our newcomers into any class, we put them into classes with newcomer teachers. And the newcomer teachers also have an ESL aide. So we have ESL aide, we have newcomer teachers, we have an awesome, huge staff of people that all come together to support the child and educate them. Sometimes not in English, you know, we are pulling bilingual resources or resources. We can utilize AI now, which is an amazing tool that can translate those assignments for the students so that they can then use those assignments or access the content and really show that they're learning in other ways. So it's really important for our parents to understand that their child is not going to fail because they don't know English. And we on our end are doing everything that we can to provide instruction, both content instruction and language instruction, and that they're not going to fail because they're missing one or the other or both. So we're providing a lot of support. Our teachers do an excellent job at sheltering instruction, right? Using all the strategies to make content comprehensible. But at the end of the day, if that is still not doing anything for the students, then they will translate their graphic organizers or their text or whatever they need to get the job done, because language proficiency is important. Acquiring the language is important, but learning the content is as well. So we have a really good balance, but our parents know that they have an ESL aide. They know that the teacher, they're in the newcomer class because it has NC on the schedule. And the counselors do an excellent job at identifying newcomers and placing them in the NC or the newcomer classes so that they are receiving that support often. And then I myself am responsible for going into those classes and ensuring that all support is actually being provided and not just stated, right? So it's a really great system, but I feel like our parents can I think that's the most important part, is knowing that somebody is there. It's not just the teacher, it's not just the administrator, it's not just the person who enrolled you, it's your counselors, it's your ESL facilitator, it's your ESL coach, it's your ESL aide, it's everybody that's coming together and supporting the child and ensuring that they're successful.
And one of the things that was mentioned as a comment on the survey is some districts felt like there's not enough of that support. So we can see why that's so important.
Absolutely.
And just to mention again, we will be doing deep dive into the academic piece of this and how the role of translanguaging and all of those kinds of things in our next webinar. So just to continue this theme, this is just an example from a district where they ensure that their parents receive printed material that's translated. And they even include pictures of the schools with addresses and the times that they're open and things like that. So this is one where they do the central office. And so they're circling and saying, this is the school that your child or the children would be going to. And again, that transportation and things like that. So just really helpful to have as much information and support and also translated literature for parents. So we also want to talk about, sometimes this happens during orientation, sometimes this happens when parents come to the school, just being aware of culture and comfort levels. So Stephany and I were talking about our own personal experiences with parents.
Oh my God.
And so Stephany, I'm going to let you talk about this.
Yes. So I was meeting one of my Afghani tutors for the first time and I was so excited. So I went to shake his hand and I was like, hi, Mohammed. My name is Stephany Gonzales. It's nice to meet you. And he showed me his hand, put it on his chest and bowed to me and said, nice to meet you. And I was very confused because I was like, I'm coming in for the handshake. This is a very normal greeting. Like, okay, that's odd, you know, this is my first time meeting you. I don't know what I did. And so I went again. I was really trying to get the handshake and he just bowed to me again. And I was like, hey, like, what is that about? And he told me, you know, that the only person that I, as a Muslim man, will touch is my wife. The only woman that I would touch is my wife. And I apologized severely, obviously, and was like, oh my God, such a faux pas. That's crazy. But in that moment, I learned, you know, that culture has a completely different set of rules when it comes to just basic interactions. And what I thought was very casual, I was like, hey, what's up? Nice to meet you. He was like, excuse me, I'm a married man. So it was shocking, but it taught me a lot in that moment. And so now I understand that there's a lot that comes with gender, especially in certain areas of the globe where
Right.
it's just not allowed.
And so I've done a lot of work and lived in Southeast Asia. So again, of course, handshaking is not prevalent there. It's more bowing or nodding. And a lot of times just learning hello and, you know, or welcome in their L1 and saying that I've learned how to say hello in a lot of languages, just because if you just start with that, sometimes that can really be helpful. One other thing, as Stephany was mentioned, is male family members, when they come to the school, may not always be comfortable even speaking with females, particularly females in authority positions. And sometimes, I mean, maybe several of you have had instances where they did not want to talk to a woman. They wanted to talk to a male. So one of the things Stephany said is, you know, often we can offer to have a male staff member present in the meetings. And that's true for females who might not want to have a meeting with a male alone. So just offering to have females present in those meetings can also be really helpful. So just, again, that awareness and comfort level and understanding how different cultures might perceive what we do in America. These are just, we just started talking about lots of different things about if you're seeing lots of different cultures that maybe you haven't seen before, being aware that, again, sometimes we're just learning through experience, but if you're coming from some parts of the world where they don't have flush toilets, they're used to squat toilets or something like that. I was talking to a district and they said, we have to teach the kids how to use the bathroom, how to use toilet paper, make sure they know how to flush, like basics. That in the cafeteria, you can't just rush to get your food. You have to line up. You need to use utensils. You need to clean up after yourself. Like these very basic things. In lots of parts of the world, students' shoes are, as part of social activities or sports activities, they take off their shoes. And at school, that's kind of a liability issue. You need to wear your shoes. So just things like that can be it's good to be aware of those, so that there can be discussions around that. Stephany, you want to talk a little bit about the segregation piece and what happens when, especially boys and girls who have not been educated together can now be educated together?
Yes, yes. So in other parts of the world, girls are not allowed to go to school at all, right? And that's something that we may know or we may not know. And we may not know that these students have never been in school together. So another shocking experience that I had was when I went into a room for the first time and I saw that the boys were all sitting at one table on one side of the room and the girls were all sitting at another side of the room at their own table. And there was a lot of teasing and stuff going on in between, and there was a lot of friction. And I was confused by that, but couldn't do anything about it because when I went to correct the boys, they snickered and they were kind of like, ha ha ha, she can't tell us anything. And really, again, it was about that cultural awareness and saying, yes, they've never been in school with girls, but they've never had a female teacher either. Right. So then we have to think about how do we normalize this setting? How do we normalize and how do we teach a boy child who's never had a female teacher how to respond and respect a female teacher? How do we create an environment in the classroom where the boys are going to respect the girls and can sit beside a girl without it feeling uncomfortable or having this sort of tension? So we had to create like a social contract where we say, okay, everybody in here is respected. And again, we had to go back to, we don't fight with each other. We don't touch each other because it's out of respect for everybody. So we had to set specific boundaries and we had to tell them that here in America, it is normal to have female teachers and it is normal for boys and girls to be in the class together, and that this isn't something funny or something crazy or something that should cause problems, but instead should just be treated like any other day. And really, by normalizing that and creating the culture of respect, what we began to see was not that we were erasing the culture before, right? We didn't demand assimilation to say, you're in America now, but really we created a culturation where the student who spoke Swahili was able to sit beside the student who spoke Pashto, the student who spoke Spanish, because we were creating our own environment. We were creating our own community in that classroom. And in that classroom, we had a culture of respect. And that was the acculturation that we were all going to have together instead of assimilating to me, the teacher's rules, right? So it was a shift from assimilation to acculturation and creating that culture of respect. But it was necessary in order to normalize and embrace everybody and move forward in learning together.
Yes, and it would be great to hear in the chat if you've had similar experiences or what things your district has maybe had to start being aware of. We're going to go through this part pretty quickly. These are just different orientation options. As people mentioned, they have different lengths of orientation. In some places, it can be really short, like a day or less than a week, where a new student is going to get a tour and they're going to be introduced to people in the school. There hopefully is going to be some peer support where maybe they have a student or group of students who speak their language that can, you know, take them around and answer questions and things like that. In many programs, there are newcomer, you know, like an ELD program. That's Stephany's model where they, and I talked to several districts where that can last us from a semester to 2 years. And that's where that comprehensive orientation comes in, where they're really getting those English language development classes, assessments, and again, you know, some at K-12 or some programs use Elevation, you know, where announcements are made. It's like the homeroom. Stephany, can you talk just a little bit about that symbol?
Oh, yeah. So obviously our newcomer students come to us and they have no English proficiency. And one of the first things that everybody wants to know is, how do I ask to go to the restroom? So rather than saying restroom or just getting up and getting the restroom pass, because that is something that all students really love to do. One of the common symbols that we like to use is to create an R, so the R in sign language. So rather than getting up whenever you want and just going and getting the pass or raising your hand or anything, a very discreet way to ask to use the restroom is to simply put your hand up and make the R. So this has become very useful, and it's the easiest way for any student to be able to take care of their needs in a respectful, calm, and sure way that the teacher will notice right away. Because sometimes the student is scared, right? They're in that silent period. They can't really talk yet. They may know the word, but it may just not be the right situation. And this is something that most students can do. Hopefully most students can do, and they know right away, the teacher knows right away, and we're able to just say, okay, you can go grab the pass, right? So it's been really cool to see that. And even at the secondary level, our kids know what this is and they can do this. So anybody can ask.
Yep. And obviously ELD, the English language development courses, focus a lot on speaking and listening. So we're going to talk about a lot more of that next time. I am going to show you some conversation circles, which you'll get to see in the next webinar, because those can be super useful. And then obviously, Stephany can talk about this too, ESL and sheltered English, using newcomer teachers for content.
Yes.
And to teach reading and writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So ESL is, ELDA is language acquisition, right? Language development. ESL is the literacy piece. So we have language development, that's a course, and literacy is the ESL course. In addition to that, we do have NC teachers in all content areas because our students are going everywhere. Our kids don't have schedules where, oh, you're just going to be with a newcomer teacher, or you're only going to be with bilingual teachers, or you're only going to, no, you have to go everywhere. And everywhere that they go, they do have an NC teacher. And hopefully that NC teacher has the resources, that the materials, they have the curriculum, and they have the ESL aids. So in that ESL class, that's where we're building the literacy skills. That's where we're taking it back to the foundational skills. That's where we're breaking down words. We're teaching the basics. We're teaching nouns. We're teaching verbs. We're teaching things that at the secondary level, we normally wouldn't, right? But the ESL class is great for building literacy skills. The ELDA class is great for that language acquisition. And then those sheltered or NC classes are great environments for our students to receive additional support in all content areas.
Awesome. So just some other considerations, just things to be thinking about. So how would an orientation differ maybe for students who were SIFE and had no formal education? What resources might be available or could be available in the future when you're starting to see languages that you haven't seen before? Maybe you only have one student who speaks Wolof or something. How do you handle that? And when students come throughout the year, do you have a process and an orientation in place for them? So we had a student one time who showed up in April or May, the end of the school year, with no English. And how do we provide those services? So, and then what staff and peer support is in place beyond orientation? So after if you're doing one of those shorter orientations and you don't have the kinds of more extensive ELD or ESL classes, And then what services are in place for students that have had trauma-like experiences? You know, we're getting a lot of students who have been in refugee camps and have had family separation, war, etc., and just that really consideration for trauma-informed care and training for staff to know how to handle that. And then we just wanted to run through a couple of questions just to think about if you have started to see maybe cultures or languages or faiths that you haven't seen before. And Stephany mentioned like making a particular holiday just a school holiday. So our religious holidays, are people aware of them, and are students excused? Some Muslim students will leave early on Fridays. Has there been planning for Muslim students? So she talked about food choices, but during Ramadan, when students are not allowed to eat during the day, I talked to a school where they have a separate space for those students, so they don't have to be in the cafeteria around all that food during the day. And then we talked about clothing, because that can be an issue for lots of different cultures. And then a big one is, how does the school prevent and address when there's bullying, when American students are making fun, or another culture is making fun of another student or group of students for being other. And then how do we socialize and get peer interaction among cultures, among students who speak English and their non-English speaking peers as they are integrating? And, you know, extracurricular activities, sports, and things like that can be also really useful. Speaking and listening, I'm just going to introduce you to something here. This is, we're going to talk a lot more about this next time, but it is one of the biggest issues that comes up is, how do we help much more effectively develop language skills? And so you're going to hear next time from Paula, who's in a program in DC, and it is a way to start every class. You can use it for lots of different things, so you'll get to hear from her next time. They've been doing this for a long time, and it's amazing. I just want to give you some examples. Starting with newcomers, like, what is your name? Where are you from? How long have you been here? And then modeling it, and then having students practice. You can, you know, this was her schedule kind of in the beginning during week 1. And then, so we're getting students talking to each other and practicing with support and modeling, so that we're actually building those language skills right from the beginning. When our students are in, you know, stage 1, they're often very quiet and very hesitant to speak. So it is actually a language development model. And then you can connect it to academic kinds of things, or just things that students need to know. So you could give, you know, so you're going to explain money and what the name of each coin is and how much it's worth. And then you give each student a coin. And then the conversation is, you know, I have a penny, it's spelled Penny. So you're also connecting to that literacy piece, and then how much it's worth. You can do it for almost anything. So she's created a whole curriculum, but you could connect this to almost any just cultural thing that you wanted students to know about America or Texas, but also to lots of academic areas. This is the area that we would love to have you comment on if you've seen other resources. So we're just going to show you some. Stephany said this was the game changer for her, this book. Did you want to talk about that briefly?
Yes, absolutely. So if you are working with a variety of languages spoken in your classroom or at your campus, I highly recommend Boosting Achievement, Reaching Students with Interrupted or Minimal Education. So Dr. Carol Salva does an amazing job at explaining her own experience as a multilingual educator with years of experience in Texas, where she was always one of the best educators, but it was only with Spanish speaking students. So when she started getting a refugee population in her district, she was like, whoa, this is a whole new ball game, because I can't rely on my experience. And now I really have to focus on language acquisition and literacy in students that speak a completely different language. So it's got a whole bunch of strategies. It's got things for behavior management, instruction, literacy, and it's incredible. I highly recommend it.
And then this is another book that several administrators talked about. So these are great resources if you have, if you're new to bilingual education yourself, or if you have teachers that are. This is specifically focusing on language-rich classrooms. So for example, you know, this is just one of the 7 steps, but super helpful. Again, Carol Salva has a blog with lots of great information, and Valentina Gonzales also has lots and lots of resources. Those are 2 people that people mentioned a lot when I was talking to them. This is a resource I love because English for Everyone has so many resources. And they've got images and words, and students really like them often when they can't describe or know the word for something because they're so themed. I never recommend teachers pay teachers, but if you are starting this process, there are some good things out there in terms, especially for middle and high school, because you don't want to use things that look like they're for little kids. So this is just one that a lot of people had recommended because it had both digital and printable things. There's, you know, some audio available, more than 400 pages set up, you know, for weeks. And now we have ChatGPT and AI. So this is just an example of a piece of content that was translated into Haitian Creole. Took about 10 seconds to create that. And then preparing for academic instruction, that's really going to be focus of our next webinar. So how do we bridge from that functional English to academic English, those tier 2 and tier 3 words? How do we really develop those literacy skills, reading, spelling, and writing, and then assessing progress and promoting success? So I'm going to have Stephany give you just a little teaser for about EB Talks.
Awesome. So EB Talks were a big game changer with our students because it made them aware of what they're being assessed on when it came to TELPAS. Our students genuinely thought they took TELPAS because they were Mexican. That's crazy, right? So it's English language proficiency assessment. We're assessing you because at one point you were labeled an EB, or you were in a bilingual program when you were in elementary school, or obviously because you're a newcomer now. So we need to measure your English language proficiency according to the state of Texas. So when we told them it's not just a long test, it's a test that measures all 4 language domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. They understood, oh, wait, it's 4 mini tests. It's not one long test. And although it's not a graduation requirement, it's a way for us to track how well you speak English, because English language proficiency, academic English language proficiency, is a skill that we want you to have before you go out into the real world. And so that you're more likely to be successful, you're more likely to go to college, you're more likely to get a great job, right? So we were able to have conversations about students and say, hey, your writing is incredible, but your speaking is kind of low. So when we look at the way that you scored, and we're taking the data from either the Summit K-12 assessment or the data from the previous year's TELPAS, we were able to show the students how they performed and talk through, hey, did you speak at all? Because you got a 1 and you've been here for 3 years at this point. You're still coming out as a beginner for speaking only. Your listening is at a 3. Your writing is at a 2. Your reading is at a 3. So you're scoring really well. It's just your speaking that's far behind what's going on. Are you speaking into the microphone? Are you speaking for 45 seconds? When you speak, are you speaking one sentence, or are you using the vocabulary that you use to write this incredible paragraph that you just submitted to me? So those EB Talks can be a really powerful tool because they bring value to the assessment and they give students a goal. Next time I want you to shoot for writing as your goal. I want you to shoot for advanced high. I want you to shoot for intermediate. I want you to shoot for advanced in these different language domains. It's not just a test that you take every year. It's much more than that.
Awesome. So that's what we will definitely be digging into as well. So see some examples of that. So we'll take questions and discussions if people want to put that in the chat. Just a reminder that part 2 will really focus on the academic instruction for emergent bilinguals. And we'll be bringing, again, a lot of resources there. So you'll get a reminder of that. So We hope today's session was insightful and provided valuable takeaways. We would love to help you find the right solutions. So if you're ready to connect with one of our literacy consultants at Reading Horizons, you can simply click yes when that comes up, and we'll be in touch right away. If now isn't the right time, that's perfectly fine. We'll look forward to seeing you at next month's session. So, questions? Anyone have anything in the chat that they would like to talk about? If not, we're almost at time and we would love to hear from you. So thank you so much, especially if you took our survey or submitted questions. We will again make sure to answer all of those next time. Thank you very much. And thank you, Stephany.
Thank you guys. This was an honor. It was really fun.